The sterile white corridors of Manhattan's most prestigious private hospital had never witnessed such chaos. 12 of the world's most renowned obstetricians stood helplessly around a delivery room, their combined centuries of medical expertise rendered useless. Inside, Victoria Ashford Sterling, heir to a pharmaceutical empire worth $37 billion, lay in agony as her baby refused to come into the world. The monitors beeped frantically. Victoria's husband, James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Tech Industries, paced outside the door, his $1,000 shoes wearing tracks into the marble floor. He'd bought this entire hospital wing. He'd flown in specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and the Royal London Hospital. Money was no object. Power was no obstacle. Yet his wife and unborn child hung in the balance, and all his wealth meant nothing. "We're losing her vitality," Dr. Chin whispered, his voice tight with professional fear. "The baby's position is impossible. We've never seen anything like this." "Prep for emergency C-section," barked Dr. Morrison, but even as she said it, she knew. Victoria's blood pressure was plummeting. The anesthesia could be fatal in her current state. They were trapped between impossible choices, each one potentially deadly. Outside, a woman in a faded blue cleaning uniform pushed her cart past the restricted area, her weathered hands gripping the mop handle. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she'd cleaned these floors for 15 years, invisible to the wealthy patients who walked these halls. But tonight something would change. Tonight, Rosa would do something that would make her impossible to ignore, something that 12 brilliant doctors with all their degrees in technology could not do. What happened in that delivery room would challenge everything the medical world believed about expertise, about worth, about the true meaning of knowledge. And it would begin with a simple act that no one saw coming. Victoria Ashford Sterling had always gotten everything she wanted. Born into privilege that most people couldn't fathom, she'd attended the finest schools, traveled on private jets before she could walk, and had never heard the word no applied to her desires. When she met James Sterling at a charity gala in Monaco, their union seemed written in the stars, or at least in the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal. Two dynasties merging, creating what Forbes called the power couple of the decade. But pregnancy had humbled her in ways that money couldn't fix. The morning sickness had been relentless, lasting far beyond the promised first trimester. Her body, which had always been under her control, sculpted by personal trainers and perfected by dermatologists, now seemed to belong to someone else. The baby growing inside her had its own agenda, and for the first time in her life, Victoria couldn't simply buy her way to comfort. She'd hired Dr. Patricia Morrison, voted best obstetrician in New York 5 years running, at a rate of $50,000 per month. Dr. Morrison brought in a team of specialists. They monitored every heartbeat, every measurement, every indicator with technology that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. Victoria's pregnancy was documented with the precision of a moon landing. "Everything is perfect," Dr. Morrison assured her during each appointment. "Your baby is healthy. You're healthy. This will be a textbook delivery." James was equally meticulous. He'd commissioned a nursery that cost more than most people's houses, with smart cribs that monitored the baby's breathing, walls painted with non-toxic, imported Italian paint, and a sound system that played classical music curated by a child development psychologist from Stanford. He'd even hired a team of night nurses from an elite agency in Switzerland, women who had cared for the children of presidents and movie stars. "Our child will have everything," James said, his hand on Victoria's swollen belly. "The best education, the best opportunities, the best life. Nothing but the best." Victoria smiled, but lately she'd been feeling something she couldn't quite name. A loneliness that pressed against her chest even when James was beside her. A fear that whispered through her dreams. She'd wake at 3 in the morning, her heart racing, and wander through their penthouse apartment, 10,000 square feet overlooking Central Park, feeling like a ghost in her own life. Her mother had died when Victoria was 10, and her father had responded by burying himself in business, building his empire while Victoria was raised by a succession of nannies. She barely remembered what her mother's voice sounded like. Now, carrying her own child, she found herself wondering if she even knew how to be a mother. Could love be purchased? Could it be scheduled and optimized like everything else in her life? The pregnancy progressed, and despite Dr. Morrison's assurances, Victoria felt a growing unease. The baby moved differently than expected. Sometimes, it seemed like the child was deliberately positioning itself wrong, as if rebelling even before birth. The doctors noticed it too, though they tried to hide their concern behind professional smiles. "Just a stubborn little one," Dr. Chin said cheerfully. "Nothing to worry about." But Victoria worried. And when her water broke 3 weeks early, during a thunderstorm that knocked out power across half of Manhattan, that worry exploded into terror. The emergency generators kicked in immediately, bathing the delivery room in artificial light. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Morrison had assembled her team. Within an hour, they'd called in specialists from across the country. By hour 3, 12 doctors stood in various positions around Victoria, each one studying monitors, consulting with colleagues, their faces growing increasingly grave. The baby's position is transverse, Dr. Morrison explained to James, who'd been allowed into an observation room. Sideways. But it's more complicated than that. The umbilical cord is wrapped in a way we've never encountered. If we try to turn the baby manually, we risk cutting off oxygen. If we attempt a C-section in this position, we could cause catastrophic bleeding. Then what do we do? James demanded, his voice cracking. For the first time in his adult life, he felt powerless. His billions couldn't solve this. His connections couldn't fix this. His wife was suffering and he could only watch. We're trying everything, Dr. Chin assured him. We've consulted with colleagues in Tokyo, London, and Tel Aviv. We're reviewing every case study in our database. We'll find a solution. But as the hours crawled by, no solution emerged. They tried external manipulation, hoping to coax the baby into a better position, but the child wouldn't budge. They considered medications to relax Victoria's muscles, but her blood pressure made that dangerous. They debated emergency procedures that had worked in similar cases, but nothing was quite like this. It was as if the baby was locked in an impossible puzzle, and every potential solution created new problems. Victoria's screams echoed through the private wing. No amount of pain medication seemed to help. She was exhausting herself, her body fighting a battle it couldn't win. The monitors showed the baby's heart rate beginning to fluctuate, not critical yet, but trending toward danger. We're running out of time, Dr. Morrison said quietly to her team. If we don't make a decision in the next hour, we'll lose them both. In the observation room, James felt his carefully constructed world crumbling. He'd built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced down corporate raiders and hostile boards. He'd always found a way to win. But this wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't something he could strategize or leverage or outspend. His wife and child were slipping away, and all his power meant absolutely nothing. He pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the doctors huddle in urgent consultation. They looked scared. These world-renowned experts, these masters of their field, they looked lost. Outside in the hallway, Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart, following her usual route despite the chaos. She wasn't supposed to be on this floor during an emergency, but the regular night supervisor was out sick, and the replacement didn't know the protocols. Rosa had cleaned this hospital for 15 years, working the night shift so she could care for her grandmother during the day. She was invisible to most people, just another worker in a blue uniform, someone to look past rather than at. But Rosa noticed everything. She noticed which doctors were kind to the nurses and which ones weren't. She noticed which patients recovered faster when they had family visiting. She noticed patterns that no one else seemed to see, connections that weren't in any medical textbook. And tonight, as she passed the delivery room, she noticed something that made her stop. Through the small window in the door, she saw Victoria's position on the bed. She saw the angle of the monitors. And she saw something that the 12 brilliant doctors, with all their technology and expertise, had missed. Rosa's grandmother had been a part era, a traditional midwife, in their village in Guatemala. Rosa had grown up watching her grandmother bring babies into the world, using techniques passed down through generations, knowledge that had never been written in medical journals or taught in universities. Her grandmother had delivered over 300 babies in her lifetime, including Rosa herself when her mother had gone into sudden labor during a mountain storm, far from any hospital. Rosa knew she should walk away. This wasn't her place. These weren't her people. She was just a cleaner, and these were some of the most important people in New York. Who was she to interfere? But through the window, she watched Victoria scream, and she saw in that wealthy woman's face the same terror she'd seen in her own mother's face in the stories her grandmother told. Pain didn't care about money. Fear didn't respect social class. And in that moment, Rosa made a decision that would change everything. Rosa set down her mop and pushed open the door. Immediately, a nurse moved to block her. "You can't be in here. This is a restricted." "The baby is turned to the left side," Rosa said quietly, her accented English cutting through the chaos. "The mother needs to be positioned on her right side, elevated at exactly 33 degrees, with her left knee bent and supported." The room fell silent. 12 doctors turned to stare at this cleaning woman who dared to enter their sanctum. Security. Dr. Morrison snapped. Get this woman out of here immediately. But Rosa didn't move. She looked directly at Victoria, whose eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. Senora, I can help you. My grandmother delivered 300 babies. I know what you need. How dare you? James burst through the door, his face red with fury. You're a cleaner. You have no business. James, wait. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, but it silenced her husband. She'd heard something in Rosa's tone, seen something in her eyes. Certainty. Come. The same quality she'd been searching for in all these expensive doctors and hadn't found. Dr. Morrison, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. What do you recommend? The doctor hesitated. Mrs. Sterling, we're still evaluating. You've been evaluating for 5 hours, Victoria interrupted. My baby is dying. I'm dying. What exactly do you recommend right now, this minute? The silence was damning. The 12 doctors looked at each other, and in that moment, their collective helplessness was impossible to hide. Victoria looked at Rosa. What did you say I need to do? Dr. Morrison stepped forward. Mrs. Sterling, this woman has no medical training. She's not licensed. If something goes wrong, we could all be liable for. If I die because you did nothing, Victoria said, her voice like steel, you'll be liable for that too. Tell me what you saw, she said to Rosa. Rosa moved closer to the bed, her weathered hands surprisingly gentle as she touched Victoria's shoulder. The baby is sideways, but not the way they think. The head is pointed toward your left side, pressing against your ribs. The umbilical cord is wrapped around the body, yes, but loosely. If you turn onto your right side and lift your left leg, gravity and position will help the baby turn naturally. The body knows what to do, Senora. We just have to help it remember. That's absurd, Dr. Chin protested. We've already tried positional changes. The baby won't move. You tried turning her to the left, Rosa said calmly. The baby's head is on the left. You were pushing it further into the ribs. Turn right and the baby will slide downward into position. Dr. Morrison's eyes widened. She pulled up the ultrasound images on the screen, studying them with fresh perspective. My God, she whispered. She might be right. We were reading the position backward. The mirror image on the screen, we assumed. I want to try it, Victoria said. Help me turn. Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise against. Dr. Morrison began, but Victoria cut her off. You've had 5 hours to advise. Now I'm deciding. Someone help me move. Rosa didn't wait for permission. With surprising strength, she helped Victoria shift onto her right side, arranging pillows with practiced efficiency. She bent Victoria's left knee, supporting it at a precise angle. Then she placed one hand on Victoria's belly and one on her back. Now breathe, Senora. Deep breaths. Let your body relax. The baby will come when the path is clear. The doctors watched, skeptical and silent. The monitors continued their anxious beeping. James stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists, torn between hope and fury. And then something shifted. Victoria gasped. I can feel it. The baby is moving. The monitors reflected the change immediately. The fetal heart rate stabilized. Victoria's blood pressure began to drop toward normal levels. And slowly, incrementally, the baby began to turn. For the next 40 minutes, two forms of knowledge worked side by side in that delivery room. Rosa stayed at Victoria's side, her hands moving with practiced confidence, applying pressure here, adjusting position there, speaking in soft Spanish that somehow transcended the language barrier. The doctors monitored everything with their technology, watching in amazement as the baby continued its slow rotation. How did you know? Dr. Chin asked quietly, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Rosa didn't take her eyes off Victoria. My grandmother taught me to see with more than eyes. To feel the life moving inside. To understand that each baby has its own path to the world. Technology is good, but sometimes it makes you forget to feel, to trust what your hands tell you. Dr. Morrison found herself studying Rosa's techniques, mentally cataloging them. This woman had no formal education, yet she understood aspects of childbirth that weren't in any medical textbook. It was humbling and enlightening in equal measure. The baby's head is down, one of the attending physicians announced, staring at the monitor. Full dilation. She's ready to push. Victoria looked at Rosa, tears streaming down her face. Will you stay? Please? Si, Senora. I will stay. What followed was the most unusual delivery the hospital had ever witnessed. 12 world-class doctors stood in attendance, but it was Rosa who coached Victoria through each contraction, who knew exactly when to push and when to breathe, who understood the rhythm of birth in a way that couldn't be taught in medical school. Push now, Senora. Not too hard. Let the baby lead the way. Good. Now rest. Breathe deep. The body knows. Trust the body. Victoria followed Rosa's instructions with absolute faith. In her exhaustion and pain, she'd found something she'd never expected. Trust in someone she'd only just met, someone from a completely different world, someone she might have passed in the hallway 1,000 times without seeing. James watched from Victoria's side, holding her hand, witnessing something that would change him forever. His wife, the woman who wore designer clothes and attended charity galas, was being saved by a hospital cleaner. All his money, all his power, all the expensive doctors he'd hired, none of it had mattered as much as this small woman with calloused hands and ancient knowledge. I can see the head, one of the nurses called out, excitement breaking through professional composure. One more push, Senora, Rosa said gently. Your baby wants to meet you. Victoria screamed, pouring every last ounce of her strength into that final push. And then, cutting through the tension and fear and exhaustion, another sound filled the room. A baby's cry. It's a girl, Dr. Morrison announced, her voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, healthy girl. The delivery room erupted in relieved cheers. Nurses moved efficiently to clean and check the baby while Dr. Morrison handled the afterbirth. But Victoria only had eyes for Rosa, who stood quietly to the side, tears running down her weathered face. Thank you, Victoria whispered. Thank you for saving us. Rosa smiled, a smile that transformed her tired face into something radiant. You saved yourself, Senora. You just needed someone to remember the old ways. As the nurses placed the baby in Victoria's arms, James found himself standing before Rosa. He opened his mouth to speak, to thank her, to ask her how much money she wanted, but Rosa held up her hand. No, Senor. I did what any person would do. What any person should do. Life is precious no matter who carries it. Your money cannot buy what matters most. And then, as quietly as she'd entered, Rosa picked up her cleaning supplies and left the room, leaving behind 12 humbled doctors and 2 forever changed parents. The next morning, Victoria woke in her private recovery suite, her daughter sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her bed. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything gold. But for the first time the luxury felt hollow. She kept thinking about Rosa, about those worn hands that had saved her life, about the woman who'd cleaned these floors for 15 years while Victoria's company had made billions. I need to find her, Victoria said to James, who'd spent the night in an armchair refusing to leave. The woman who helped me. Rosa. James had already been thinking the same thing. He'd spent the dark hours of early morning confronting uncomfortable truths about himself. He'd always believed that success meant you'd earned your position, that wealth was a reflection of value. But Rosa had revealed the lie in that thinking. She'd done what 12 expensive doctors couldn't, yet she probably made minimum wage. By afternoon, they'd located Rosa through the hospital's employment records. Victoria insisted on meeting her, despite Dr. Morrison's concerns about rest. They found Rosa in the staff break room, eating a simple lunch of rice and beans from a plastic container, her cleaning uniform spotless despite the long night. Senora Sterling, Rosa stood up quickly, surprised and uncomfortable. You should be resting. Please sit, Victoria said, gesturing for Rosa to join her. And call me Victoria. Rosa sat reluctantly, aware of the stares from other staff members. This kind of thing didn't happen. Rich patients didn't seek out cleaners. The social order was clear and unquestioned. I wanted to thank you properly, Victoria began, but Rosa was already shaking her head. There is no need, Senora. I only did what 12 doctors couldn't do, James interrupted. You saved my wife's life. You saved my daughter's life. There must be something we can do for you. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, there is something. But it is not for me. She told them about her grandmother, now 92 years old, living with severe arthritis and diabetes. Rosa had been trying for years to get her into a decent care facility, but her cleaning salary wasn't enough. The waiting lists for affordable places were years long, and the private facilities cost more than Rosa made in a decade. I can take care of that, James said immediately. The best facility in Manhattan. Private room round-the-clock care. Consider it done. But Rosa still looked uncomfortable. That is very kind, Senor. But there is something else. Something more important. She told them about the immigrant community she lived in Queens. Many of the women there were pregnant, working multiple jobs, unable to afford proper prenatal care. They were afraid to go to hospitals, worried about costs they couldn't pay, afraid of being judged for their lack of insurance or immigration status. Rosa had been trying to organize informal health clinics, bringing in volunteer doctors, but it was never enough. "These women," Rosa said, her voice passionate, "they have the same fears you had last night, Senora. The same pain. But they suffer alone, in apartments with too many people, working until the baby comes, praying nothing goes wrong. They need help. Real help." Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. She'd never thought about these things, never considered the world beyond her privileged bubble. But now, holding her daughter, knowing she'd almost died despite having access to the best care money could buy, she understood. Healthcare shouldn't be a luxury. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded. Life was precious regardless of who carried it. "What if we started a program?" Victoria said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. "A real prenatal care initiative for underserved communities. Free clinics, trained midwives, combining modern medicine with traditional knowledge. What if we took what happened last night and turned it into something bigger?" James stared at his wife. This was not the woman he'd married. Or maybe it was and he'd never really known her. "You mean like a foundation?" "More than that. A complete restructuring of how we think about maternal health care. Rosa, would you help us? Would you share your grandmother's knowledge, help us train others?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Si, Senora. But I am just a cleaner. I have no education, no." "You have something more valuable than education," Victoria interrupted. "You have wisdom, experience, heart. Things that can't be taught in medical school." Dr. Morrison, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "If you're serious about this, I'd like to be involved. Last night taught me that we've become too dependent on technology, too divorced from the fundamental human art of midwifery. I'd be honored to learn from someone like Rosa's grandmother." Over the next hour, sitting in that break room, an unprecedented collaboration took shape. Victoria would use her family's resources to fund it. James would provide business expertise and organizational structure. Dr. Morrison would bring medical credibility and recruit other doctors. And Rosa would serve as the bridge, connecting traditional knowledge with modern medicine. But as they talked, Rosa remained quiet, a troubled look on her face. "What is it?" Victoria asked. "Is something wrong?" Rosa hesitated, then said, "Senora, you are very kind. This program would help many people. But I wonder, do you know what it means? To truly see people like me, people you have walked past for years? This is not just about starting a clinic. This is about understanding that the woman who cleans your floor might have wisdom you need. That the man who parks your car might have experiences that could teach you something. That being poor does not mean being less." The words hung in the air, challenging and true. Victoria felt them land like stones in her chest. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've lived my whole life in a bubble. I've never had to think about people who struggle because I've never struggled. Last night you gave me more than medical help. You gave me a glimpse of a different world, a different way of being. And I want to be different. I want my daughter to grow up understanding what really matters." Rosa smiled, then a real smile. "Then perhaps, Senora, the lesson is not just for the women in my community. Perhaps it is also for you." 3 months later, Victoria stood in a renovated community center in Queens, surrounded by pregnant women of all ages and backgrounds. The Sterling Martinez Maternal Health Initiative had opened its doors, offering free prenatal care, birthing classes taught by both licensed midwives and traditional parteiras, and postpartum support for mothers who had nowhere else to turn. Rosa's grandmother, Dona Carmen, sat in a place of honor, consulting with doctors who'd come from prestigious institutions to learn from her. She spoke through Rosa's translation, sharing techniques that had been passed down through 5 generations, knowledge that had saved lives long before hospitals existed. Dr. Morrison found herself taking notes like a medical student again, amazed by the elegance of techniques she'd never encountered in her training. She watched Dona Carmen examine a pregnant woman with nothing but her hands, then accurately predict the baby's weight, position, and likely delivery date, all of which later ultrasounds confirmed. "How do you know these things?" Dr. Morrison asked through Rosa's translation. Dona Carmen smiled, her ancient face creasing with warmth. "The body speaks to those who know how to listen. Western medicine looks at numbers and pictures. We look at the whole person, body, mind, spirit. Both ways are needed. Both ways are good." James had undergone his own transformation. He'd started volunteering at the center, initially just helping with administrative tasks, but gradually becoming more involved. He'd brought in business contacts who donated equipment and supplies. He'd secured partnerships with hospitals that agreed to provide backup emergency care. He'd discovered that his skills in organization and strategy could serve purposes beyond profit. One evening he found himself helping set up chairs for a birthing class, working alongside men from the community. One of them, a construction worker named Miguel, started telling stories about his wife's pregnancy, the fears they'd faced, the gratitude they felt for this center. Before this place, Miguel said, we didn't know where to go. My wife was scared all the time. Now she comes here, she talks to other women, she learns. She feels safe. You gave us that, Mr. Sterling. No, James said quietly. Rosa gave you that. We just provided the building. But Miguel shook his head. Rosa had the knowledge. You had the power to make people listen. Both were needed. This is what happens when different worlds come together. Victoria spent most of her time at the center, often bringing her daughter, whom they'd named Carmen Rosa Sterling. She turned over the day-to-day management of her business to a team of executives, realizing that her presence there had been more about ego than necessity. This work, though, felt essential. She'd learned to speak basic Spanish. She'd learned to make arroz con pollo from the mothers who gathered in the center's kitchen. She'd learned to listen more than she spoke, to see value in places she'd never thought to look. One afternoon, a young woman named Elena came to the center, 8 months pregnant and terrified. She'd been working in a factory, hiding her pregnancy because she couldn't afford to lose her job. Now she was in pain, bleeding slightly, afraid something was wrong. Victoria found herself holding Elena's hand as Dr. Morrison and Rosa examined her. The diagnosis was concerning but not critical. The baby was fine, but Elena needed immediate rest and monitoring. She should have been in the hospital. I can't, Elena sobbed. I can't afford it. I'll lose everything. Victoria looked at Rosa, seeing her own reflection in the other woman's eyes. 3 months ago she would have written a check, fixed the problem with money, and never thought about it again. But now she understood that wasn't enough. You'll stay with us, Victoria said. We have rooms upstairs for situations like this. You'll be monitored around the clock. And your job, I'll call your employer. I'll explain. If they fire you, I'll hire you myself. Your baby is what matters now. Everything else we'll figure out. Elena stared at her, unable to comprehend this wealthy woman's commitment. But Victoria meant every word. She'd learned that privilege wasn't something to be guilty about. It was something to be used responsibly to open doors that others couldn't reach. 2 weeks later, Elena delivered a healthy baby boy at the center, with Rosa and Donna Carmen attending, Dr. Morrison providing medical oversight, and Victoria holding Elena's hand through every contraction. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Victoria found herself crying too, overwhelmed by the miracle of it, the precious fragility of life. Thank you, Elena whispered afterward, exhausted but glowing. Thank you for seeing me. Those words echoed in Victoria's mind long after. For seeing me. How many people had she failed to see in her life? How many roses had crossed her path, invisible because she'd never thought to look? A year later, the Sterling Martinez Maternal Health Initiative had expanded to 6 locations across New York City. Maternal mortality rates in the communities they served had dropped by 40%. Over 500 babies had been born through their program, each one welcomed into the world with both cutting-edge medical care and ancient wisdom. Victoria stood at a podium, addressing a conference of obstetricians and public health officials, her daughter playing quietly with Rosa's grandchildren in the front row. James sat nearby, having sold his tech company to dedicate himself full-time to expanding their work. We've been operating under a false assumption, Victoria told the assembled crowd. We've believed that expertise only comes from formal education, that knowledge only counts if it's written in textbooks and published in journals. But the night my daughter was born, I learned differently. 12 brilliant doctors couldn't help me. But a hospital cleaner could. She gestured to Rosa, who sat uncomfortable with the attention but proud of what they'd built together. Rosa didn't save my life because she had medical credentials. She saved it because she had wisdom, the kind of wisdom that comes from generations of women helping women, from paying attention, from remembering that technology should serve humanity, not replace it. She taught me that value has nothing to do with income, that dignity isn't determined by job titles, and that sometimes the most important people in our society are the ones we've trained ourselves not to see. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. The work we're doing isn't just about maternal health, Victoria continued. It's about restructuring how we think about knowledge, about expertise, about worth. It's about building bridges between different worlds, recognizing that we all have something to learn from each other. After the speech, Victoria found Rosa outside, looking out over the city. The two women stood together, an unlikely pair who'd changed each other's lives completely. "I never thanked you properly," Victoria said. "For showing me how blind I'd been." Rosa smiled. "You thanked me by opening your eyes, Senora. That is the only thanks needed. You could have just given money and walked away. But you stayed. You changed. That is rare." "I want Carmen to grow up different," Victoria said, watching her daughter play. "I want her to see people really see them. To understand that everyone has value, everyone has something to teach. I want her to know that the measure of a person isn't their bank account or their job title." "Then teach her by showing her," Rosa said simply. "Children learn what they see, not what they're told." As if on cue, little Carmen came running over, followed by Rosa's granddaughter, Maria. The two girls had become inseparable, despite the vast difference in their family circumstances. They spoke a mixture of English and Spanish, teaching each other words, sharing toys, oblivious to all the things that were supposed to divide them. "Mama, can Maria come to our house?" Carmen asked. "Of course," Victoria said. "And maybe we can go to Maria's house too?" Carmen nodded enthusiastically, already pulling her friend back to play. Rosa and Victoria watched them go, two mothers who'd found unexpected friendship in impossible circumstances. "You know," Victoria said thoughtfully, "the pharmaceutical company my father built, we're one of the biggest in the world. We make billions of dollars every year. But we've never made anyone as happy as what we're doing here. Money doesn't buy meaning. It doesn't buy purpose. I had everything but I was empty. And you, working night shifts, caring for your grandmother, making barely enough to survive, you were rich in ways I couldn't comprehend. We both had things the other needed," Rosa said. "You had resources. I had knowledge. Together we made something neither could have made alone. This is how the world should work, no?" Victoria nodded, understanding the profound truth in that simple statement. 5 years after that emergency delivery, Victoria stood in the same hospital wing where it all began, dedicating a new maternal health training center. The program they'd started had now spread to 40 cities across America. Medical schools were incorporating traditional midwifery knowledge into their curriculum. Insurance companies were covering doula and midwife services. Laws were changing, systems were shifting, all because one night, a hospital cleaner had been brave enough to walk through a door she wasn't supposed to open. Rosa stood beside her, no longer wearing a cleaning uniform. She now directed the training program, teaching both ancient techniques and the importance of seeing every person's inherent worth. Her grandmother, now 97, still occasionally consulted on difficult cases, her wisdom more valuable than ever. The dedication ceremony ended, and Victoria found herself alone in that same delivery room where Carmen had been born. So much had changed. She'd changed. She'd learned that real wealth had nothing to do with money, that true expertise sometimes came from unexpected places, and that the people society valued least might be the ones with the most to teach. She thought about all the other Rosas out there, the janitors and cashiers and factory workers and nannies, people who kept the world running while remaining invisible to those they served. How much collective wisdom was being ignored? How many solutions to impossible problems were locked away in the minds of people nobody thought to ask? As she left the hospital, she passed a young housekeeper mopping the floor. Their eyes met and Victoria smiled, really seeing her. The housekeeper smiled back, surprised and pleased by the acknowledgement. It was a small moment, barely noticeable. But it was everything. What if the answers to our most impossible problems aren't found in boardrooms and laboratories, but in the wisdom of people we've trained ourselves not to see? What if the experts we desperately need are already among us, waiting for someone to simply ask, to listen, to recognize that everyone has something invaluable to teach? Who have you made invisible in your life? And what might you learn if you took the time to truly see them? This story asks us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We live in a world that measures worth by all the wrong metrics. We've created hierarchies that elevate some voices while silencing others, that treat certain types of knowledge as valuable while dismissing others as irrelevant. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Start a conversation about invisible wisdom in your community. Look for opportunities to learn from people whose voices aren't typically heard. And most importantly, practice seeing, really seeing, every person you encounter as someone with inherent worth and unique gifts to offer the world.